The dojo fell silent, except for the rhythmic thud of fists against leather. It was a humid Tuesday evening in August 1974, and the Concord Plaza multiplex in Los Angeles buzzed with an energy that seemed to crackle in the air itself. Outside, the California sun was setting behind a haze of smog and dreams, casting long shadows through the windows of what would become one of the most legendary martial arts encounters in history. But nobody in that room knew they were about to witness something that would be talked about for decades to come. Jackie Chan wiped the sweat from his brow as he demonstrated a complex sequence to a small group of students. At 20 years old, he was already making waves in Hong Kong cinema, but here in America, he was still the quiet, intense young man who spoke more with his body than his words. His English was broken, heavily accented, but his movements spoke a language that transcended any barrier. He flowed like water, struck like lightning, and moved with a precision that made even seasoned fighters stop and stare. The air conditioning unit hummed overhead, fighting a losing battle against the heat generated by 24 bodies in constant motion. The smell of sweat, leather, and determination filled the space. Mirrors lined the walls, reflecting the focused faces of students who had come to learn from this rising star of martial arts cinema. Jackie's reputation was growing, not just as an actor, but as a genuine martial artist who brought something new to the table, something that blended the traditional with the innovative. But tonight was different. Tonight, a shadow loomed in the doorway. Joe Louis stood 6 feet tall and carried himself with the confidence of a man who had never met his equal. His blonde hair was perfectly styled, his GI crisp and white, and his eyes held the cold calculation of someone who had spent years proving his dominance. At 34, Louis was at the peak of his powers. He had already claimed multiple world championships, had trained with Bruce Lee himself, and was widely regarded as one of the most formidable fighters on the planet. When Joe Louis walked into a room, conversations stopped. When he spoke, people listened. When he fought, people remembered. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees as Louis stepped inside. His presence was magnetic, commanding, almost predatory. He moved with the measured steps of a man who knew exactly what he was capable of, and more importantly, what others were not. His reputation preceded him like a thundercloud, and everyone in that dojo knew they were in the presence of greatness. Jackie noticed the shift in atmosphere immediately. He had been in the middle of explaining a defensive technique, his hands moving in fluid arcs as he demonstrated the proper angles and timing. But now his students were looking past him, their attention drawn to the figure who had just entered their sanctuary. Jackie turned slowly, his movements still graceful, despite the sudden tension that gripped his shoulders. The two men locked eyes across the training floor. It was a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, though it lasted perhaps 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, an entire universe of possibility opened up. Here was the established master, the proven champion, the man who had conquered every challenge placed before him. And there was the rising star, the innovator, the young fighter who dared to suggest that there might be new ways to approach the ancient art of combat. Louis smiled, but it was not a warm expression. It was the smile of a predator who had just spotted particularly interesting prey. He walked forward with deliberate slowness, his footsteps echoing in the sudden quiet. The students instinctively moved back, creating a circle around the two martial artists. The very air seemed to thicken with anticipation. "Jackie Chan," Louis said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. "I've been hearing interesting things about you." Jackie bowed slightly, a gesture of respect that was both genuine and calculated. He understood the dynamics at play here. This was not just a social visit. This was a challenge, delivered with a kind of polite menace that only true fighters could appreciate. "Mr. Louis," Jackie replied, his accent thick but his meaning clear. "Honor to meet you." Louis circled slowly around Jackie, his eyes taking in every detail. He observed the way the younger man held himself, the subtle shifts in weight distribution, the micro-expressions that might reveal weakness or fear. What he saw intrigued him. Jackie showed no signs of intimidation, no nervous energy, no desperate need to prove himself. Instead, there was a calm readiness, like a coiled spring waiting for the right moment to release its energy. "I've been watching some of your work," Louis continued, his voice conversational, but with an undercurrent of something sharper. "Interesting approach. Very creative." The word creative hung in the air like a challenge. In the world of traditional martial arts, creativity was often viewed with suspicion. The old ways were the proven ways, tested in countless battles, refined over generations. Innovation was for showmen and actors, not for serious fighters. Jackie's students watched in fascination as their teacher navigated this verbal minefield. They could sense the tension building, could feel the electricity in the air that preceded something significant. Some of them had heard stories about Joe Louis, about his devastating power, his surgical precision, his ability to end fights before his opponents even realized they had begun. "I believe," Louis said, stopping directly in front of Jackie, "that speed is the ultimate weapon. Everything else is secondary. Power, technique, strategy, they all mean nothing if you can't deliver them fast enough to matter." Jackie nodded thoughtfully, considering the statement. It was a philosophy that had served Louis well. There was no denying that. His lightning-fast combinations had demolished countless opponents. His ability to close distance and strike before his enemies could react had made him a legend. But Jackie had seen something different in his training, had experienced something that suggested speed alone was not the complete answer. "Speed is important," Jackie agreed, his words carefully chosen. "But timing is everything." Louis raised an eyebrow. Here was a direct challenge to his fundamental philosophy, delivered by someone young enough to be his student. The audacity was breathtaking, and Louis found himself genuinely curious about what this young man thought. He knew that the champion did not. "Timing," Louis repeated, tasting the word. "Interesting theory. But theory and practice are very different things, aren't they?" The question hung between them like a gauntlet thrown down. Everyone in the room understood what was happening now. This was not going to remain a philosophical discussion. The two warriors were circling each other, testing, probing, looking for weaknesses and advantages. The students pressed back against the walls, giving them space while ensuring they would miss nothing of what was about to unfold. Jackie's mind was racing, but his body remained perfectly still. He was calculating angles, distances, possibilities. He had studied Joe Louis extensively, had watched footage of his fights, had analyzed his patterns and preferences. Louis was devastatingly effective. There was no question about that. His straight-line attacks were like bullets, fast and precise, and almost impossible to counter using conventional methods. But Jackie had never been conventional. "Perhaps," Jackie said quietly, "we could explore this question together." Louis grinned, and this time the expression was genuinely pleased. Here was someone willing to put their theories to the test. Someone who understood that in martial arts, talk was cheap and demonstration was everything. He began to remove his jacket, his movements economical and practiced. "I was hoping you'd say that," Louis said. "I have to admit, I'm curious about your timing." The students formed a loose circle around the two fighters, their excitement barely contained. They were about to witness something extraordinary, a clash between two completely different approaches to martial arts. Louis represented the pinnacle of traditional Western fighting, all power and speed and overwhelming aggression. Jackie represented something newer, something that blended Eastern philosophy with innovative technique. Jackie removed his own jacket and began to stretch, his movements flowing and rhythmic. As he prepared his body for what was to come, he reflected on the path that had brought him to this moment. He had trained in the traditional ways, had learned the classical forms and techniques that had been passed down through generations. But he had also experimented, had played with new ideas, had asked questions that his masters sometimes found uncomfortable. What if speed was not the ultimate weapon? What if there was something more important, something more fundamental? What if the key was not to be faster than your opponent, but to be exactly as fast as you needed to be, precisely when you needed to be it? Louis finished his preparations and moved to the center of the circle. His stance was textbook perfect, balanced and ready, his hands positioned for maximum striking efficiency. He looked like what he was, a fighting machine honed to absolute perfection, ready to demonstrate why he was considered one of the most dangerous men on the planet. "Whenever you're ready," Louis said, his voice calm and confident. Jackie took his position opposite the champion. His stance was different, more relaxed, almost casual in appearance. To the untrained eye, he might have looked unprepared, even vulnerable. But those who knew what to look for could see the subtle signs, the perfect balance, the loose shoulders that could explode into motion without telegraphing, the eyes that saw everything while revealing nothing. The two men faced each other across perhaps 8 feet of empty space. The silence in the room was absolute now, broken only by the distant hum of traffic outside and the soft whisper of the air conditioning. Every person present understood they were witnessing something special, something that would be talked about and analyzed for years to come. Louis moved first, as everyone knew he would. His opening attack was a thing of beauty, a straight right hand that cut through the air like a sword stroke. His speed was phenomenal, exactly as advertised. The punch traveled the distance between them in what seemed like an instant, aimed with surgical precision at Jackie's chin. But when the strike arrived, Jackie was no longer there. The movement was so subtle, so perfectly timed, that several of the students weren't even sure what they had seen. Jackie had shifted perhaps 2 inches to his right, and Lewis's devastating punch whistled harmlessly past his ear. But more than that, in the exact moment that Lewis was fully committed to his attack, Jackie's own hand was moving, a gentle tap that landed on Lewis's extended wrist. Lewis pulled back immediately, his eyes wide with surprise. That should not have happened. His speed had been perfect, his technique flawless. Yet somehow, this young man had not only avoided the strike, but had actually touched him during the exchange. It was impossible, and yet it had clearly occurred. Again, Lewis said, his voice tight with concentration. This time he launched a combination. A left jab followed immediately by a right cross, then a left hook. It was a sequence that had ended countless fights, delivered with the kind of speed and power that made him a champion. The punches came in a blur of motion, each one potentially fight-ending, each one delivered with the precision of a master craftsman. And yet, somehow, none of them landed. Jackie moved like smoke, like water, like something that was there and not there at the same time. He didn't retreat, didn't duck or weave dramatically. Instead, he seemed to flow around the attacks, his body positioned always exactly where it needed to be to avoid contact. And again, at the precise moment when Lewis was most committed to his offensive, Jackie's hand found its target. This time, a light touch to Lewis's shoulder. The champion stepped back, breathing heavily now, his confidence beginning to crack. This was not how these encounters were supposed to go. He was Joe Louis, the fastest fighter in the world. He did not miss, he did not get touched, he did not find himself on the defensive against unknown opponents. "What are you doing?" Lewis demanded, his frustration beginning to show. Jackie smiled, and for the first time since the encounter began, he looked completely relaxed. "I am listening," Jackie said simply. "Listening to what?" "To you. To your rhythm. To your breathing. To the sound your feet make when you shift your weight. To the way your GI moves when you prepare to strike. You are very fast, Mr. Lewis. But you are also very predictable." The word hit Lewis like a physical blow. Predictable. No one had ever called him predictable before. Devastating, yes. Overwhelming, certainly. Unbeatable, absolutely. But predictable. The suggestion was almost insulting. "Predictable," Lewis repeated, his voice dangerous now. "Not in a bad way," Jackie said quickly, sensing he had struck a nerve. "You are perfect in your technique. Every movement is exactly as it should be. But that is also, how do you say, your weakness." Lewis felt something he had not experienced in years. Doubt. This young man was suggesting that his very perfection, his adherence to proven technique, was somehow a liability. It was a concept that challenged everything he believed about martial arts, everything that had made him a champion. "Show me," Lewis said, his voice barely above a whisper. What happened next would be talked about for decades. Jackie moved forward, not with the explosive speed that characterized Lewis's attacks, but with a flowing, rhythmic motion that seemed almost casual. Lewis, operating on instinct and years of training, launched a perfect counterattack. A straight right hand that should have ended the demonstration immediately. But Jackie had known it was coming. Not through any supernatural ability, not through mystical insight, but through careful observation and perfect timing. He had seen the micro-expressions, the subtle shifts in posture, the tiny tells that preceded Lewis's favorite combination. And in knowing what was coming, he had been able to position himself, not where Lewis expected him to be, but where he needed to be, to turn the champion's own momentum against him. The result was spectacular. As Lewis's punch extended toward empty air, Jackie stepped inside the strike, his own hand moving in a gentle arc that intercepted Lewis's wrist. Using the champion's own forward momentum, Jackie guided the punch past its intended target, while simultaneously positioning himself for a counter that would have ended the fight if he had chosen to deliver it with full force. Instead, he stopped his own strike just inches from Lewis's throat, holding the position for a moment that seemed to last forever. The two men stood frozen in tableau, Lewis fully extended and off balance. Jackie in perfect control with a fight-ending technique stopped just short of contact. Then Jackie stepped back, bowed respectfully, and the spell was broken. The silence in the room was deafening. No one moved. No one spoke. No one even seemed to breathe. They had just witnessed something that should not have been possible. Joe Louis, the unbeatable champion, had been completely outmaneuvered by a 20-year-old actor from Hong Kong. Lewis straightened slowly, his mind struggling to process what had just occurred. He had been beaten. There was no other way to describe it. Not through superior speed, not through overwhelming power, but through something far more subtle and far more devastating: perfect understanding. How? Lewis asked, his voice hoarse with emotion. Jackie considered the question carefully. How could he explain something that had taken him years to understand? Something that went against every conventional wisdom about fighting. You fight like a machine, Jackie said finally. Perfect technique, perfect speed, perfect power. But machines are predictable. They do what they are programmed to do, when they are programmed to do it. I do not fight the machine. I fight the man who controls the machine. Lewis stared at the younger man, his worldview shifting beneath his feet. Everything he had believed about martial arts, everything that had made him a champion, was being called into question by this soft-spoken young man who moved like poetry and struck like lightning. The mind controls the body, Jackie continued, warming to his theme. But the body also speaks to those who know how to listen. Your breathing changes when you prepare to attack. Your weight shifts in a particular pattern before you launch a combination. Your eyes focus differently when you have chosen your target. These things happen so fast that most people cannot see them, but they are there if you know how to look. Lewis felt something crack inside his chest, something that might have been his ego, or might have been his understanding of himself. He had spent years perfecting his technique, had trained his body to respond with machine-like precision, had eliminated every wasted motion and unnecessary flourish. He had become the perfect fighting machine, and in doing so, had made himself exactly what Jackie said: predictable. But how do you counter something like that? Lewis asked, his voice small now, almost childlike. Jackie smiled, and this time the expression was warm, almost paternal, despite the age difference between them. You do not counter it, Jackie said. You embrace it. You stop trying to be perfect, and you start trying to be present. You listen to your opponent, yes, but you also listen to yourself. You feel the flow of the fight, the rhythm of the exchange. You stop imposing your will on the situation and start dancing with it. The students around them began to murmur among themselves, their minds struggling to process the philosophical implications of what they had just witnessed. This was not just a demonstration of fighting technique. It was a complete reimagining of what martial arts could be. Lewis walked to the edge of the circle and sat down heavily on a bench, his head in his hands. For years, he had been the hunter, the predator, the one who imposed his will on every situation. Now, for the first time, he understood what it felt like to be prey, to be outmatched not by superior strength or speed, but by superior understanding. Jackie approached him slowly, his movements careful and He sat down beside the champion, close enough to offer comfort, but far enough away to respect his space. I am not better than you, Jackie said quietly. You are stronger, faster, more experienced. In a real fight, with real consequences, you would probably win. But today, in this moment, I had an advantage. I knew what you were going to do before you did it. Lewis looked up, his eyes red with emotion and exhaustion. How do I learn that? He asked. How do I develop that kind of awareness? Jackie was quiet for a long moment, considering his words carefully. You start by losing, he said finally. You have been winning for so long that you have forgotten what it feels like to be vulnerable, to be uncertain, to be wrong. You have to be willing to fail, to look foolish, to have your perfect technique broken apart and rebuilt from the ground up. Lewis laughed, but it was a bitter sound. You're asking me to give up everything that makes me who I am. No, Jackie said firmly. I am asking you to add something new to what you already are. Your speed, your power, your technique, they are all valuable. But they are tools, not the entire toolbox. You can keep all of those things and still learn to listen, to flow, to be present in the moment. The two men sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, each lost in his own thoughts. Around them, the students gradually resumed their training, but the energy in the room had changed fundamentally. They had witnessed something transformative, something that had challenged their understanding of what was possible in martial arts. Finally, Lewis stood up and extended his hand to Jackie. Teach me, he said simply. Jackie clasped the offered hand, and in that moment, a friendship was born that would last for decades. Two masters from different worlds, different philosophies, different approaches to the same ultimate goal, the pursuit of perfection through constant growth and learning. We teach each other, Jackie replied. You show me your speed and power. I show you timing and flow. Together, we become something neither of us could be alone. As the evening wore on, the two fighters worked together, sharing techniques and insights, breaking down the barriers between their different styles. Lewis learned to listen to his opponent's rhythm, to feel the subtle changes that preceded attacks. Jackie learned to appreciate the devastating efficiency of perfect technique, the beauty of movements honed to absolute precision. The students watched in fascination as their teacher and the legendary champion explored new ways of moving, new approaches to ancient problems. They saw Lewis gradually shed his rigid perfection, becoming more fluid and responsive. They saw Jackie incorporate elements of Lewis's devastating directness into his own flowing style. But more than technique was being exchanged that night. Two philosophies were merging, creating something new and powerful. The rigid discipline of traditional Western martial arts was blending with the adaptive fluidity of Eastern philosophy. The result was not a compromise between the two approaches, but a synthesis that incorporated the best of both worlds. As the night drew to a close and the students began to pack up their equipment, Lewis and Jackie continued to work together, their movements becoming increasingly synchronized. They had found a common language, a way of communicating through motion that transcended cultural and stylistic differences. "You know," Lewis said as they finally prepared to leave, "I came here tonight thinking I was going to teach you something about speed." Jackie grinned, wiping the sweat from his face with a towel. "And I thought I was going to teach my students about timing," he replied. "Instead, we both learned something about humility." Lewis nodded, understanding exactly what Jackie meant. They had both come into that dojo with preconceptions, with certainties about what they knew and what others did not. They had left with questions, with new possibilities, with a deeper appreciation for the complexity and beauty of martial arts. "This won't be our last meeting," Lewis said, and it was both a promise and a prediction. "I hope not," Jackie replied. "I have a feeling we have much more to learn from each other." As they walked out into the California night, both men carried with them something they had not possessed when they entered. Lewis had discovered that true mastery was not about perfecting a single approach, but about remaining open to new possibilities. Jackie had learned that innovation without respect for tradition was empty showmanship, but that tradition without innovation was stagnation. The lesson that emerged from that humid Tuesday evening in 1974 was profound in its simplicity. Speed without timing is chaos. Power without understanding is destruction. Technique without adaptability is limitation. But when all these elements come together, when they are balanced and integrated, through respect, humility, and continuous learning, something magical happens. Two masters had met that night, each convinced of the superiority of his own approach. They had left as students, eager to explore new territories of understanding. In the years that followed, both would go on to even greater achievements, their styles enriched by what they had learned from each other. The true victory that night belonged not to Jackie Chan or Joe Louis, but to martial arts itself. Two traditions had met, clashed, and merged, creating something greater than the sum of their parts. It was a reminder that in the pursuit of mastery, the greatest opponent is often our own certainty, and the greatest victory is the willingness to remain forever a student. In the end, the question was never who was faster or stronger or more skilled. The question was, who was more willing to learn, to grow, to admit that they did not have all the answers. On that night, in that dojo, both men found the courage to embrace uncertainty, and in doing so, they discovered truths that would guide them for the rest of their lives. The legend of that encounter would grow over the years, told and retold in dojos around the world. But the real legacy was not in the story itself, but in the lesson it contained. That true mastery comes not from defeating others, but from constantly defeating the limitations we place on ourselves.